My name is Nathan Brooks, and today I'm going to tell you about the moment God spoke words that shattered my illusion of control, words that revealed I'd been trying to sustain my own life when He was the one holding it all along. Before I continue, I want to ask you something. If this resonates with your struggle, please subscribe to this channel and share it with someone who's exhausted from trying to control everything. And in the comments below, tell me what area of your life you're struggling to surrender. Your story matters, and this community is here for you. I was 32 years old when my need for control nearly destroyed everything I loved. I'd always been what people called type A, organized, driven, meticulous. But somewhere along the way, healthy planning had morphed into obsessive control. I worked as a project manager at a tech company in Austin, Texas. My job was literally to control outcomes, manage timelines, ensure everything went according to plan, and I was excellent at it, maybe too excellent. The problem was, I'd started applying the same rigid control to every aspect of my life. My relationship with my girlfriend Jessica, my finances, my health, my faith, everything had to be planned, managed, optimized, controlled. I had spreadsheets for everything, a detailed budget tracking every penny, a meal plan for the entire month, a workout schedule that couldn't be deviated from, a 5-year plan for my career, my finances, my relationship milestones. On paper, my life looked perfect. Successful career, beautiful girlfriend, good health, financial stability. But inside, I was exhausted. The effort of trying to control everything was crushing me. Jessica had started noticing. We'd been dating for 3 years, and lately she'd been pulling away. "Nathan, you plan everything," she said one evening over dinner. Dinner I'd planned 3 weeks in advance, at a restaurant I'd researched extensively, at a time that fit perfectly into our schedule. "What's wrong with planning?" "Nothing. But you don't plan, you control. Every date has to be perfect. Every conversation has to go a certain way. Every aspect of our relationship has to fit into your timeline." "I'm just trying to make sure everything works out." "But that's not your job. You can't control outcomes. You can't force life to go according to your plan." "I can try." She looked at me sadly. "That's the problem. You're so busy trying to control everything that you're missing actually living." After dinner, I went home and immediately started analyzing the conversation. What had I done wrong? How could I fix it? What did I need to adjust in my approach? I pulled out my relationship spreadsheet. Yes, I had one. It tracked date nights, important conversations, conflict resolution, intimacy, future goals. I started making notes about how to improve our communication. But even as I did it, I felt a gnawing anxiety. What if I couldn't control this? What if my planning and managing weren't enough? The next morning I woke up at 5:30 a.m. exactly as planned. I did my scheduled workout, ate my pre-planned breakfast, and arrived at work at 7:45 a.m. sharp, 15 minutes early as always. But at 9:30 a.m. my carefully controlled world started cracking. My boss called me into his office. "Nathan, we need to talk about the Henderson Project." The Henderson Project was my baby. I'd planned every detail, managed every timeline, controlled every variable. It was supposed to be perfect. What about it? "The client is pulling out. They're going with a competitor." I felt my chest tighten. "That's impossible. I did everything right. I controlled every aspect of the project." "I know you did, but sometimes, despite our best efforts, things don't work out. There has to be something I missed, some variable I didn't account for." "Nathan, you did excellent work. This isn't about you failing to control something. This is just business. Sometimes clients make decisions we can't predict or control." I left his office feeling like I'd been punched. If I couldn't control outcomes at work, the one place where control was literally my job, then what could I control? That evening, Jessica called. "We need to talk." Those 4 words every person in a relationship dreads. I knew what was coming. We met at a coffee shop. She looked sad but resolved. "Nathan, I love you. But I can't be in a relationship that feels like a project you're managing. I need spontaneity. I need freedom. I need a partner who can let go and just be present. I can change. I can be more spontaneous. But you'd plan your spontaneity, wouldn't you? You'd schedule it, optimize it, make sure it fit into your timeline. She was right. I would. I need space, she said. I need to figure out if this relationship can work, and I need you to figure out why you're so afraid of letting go of control. After she left, I sat in my car in the parking lot, hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. My career was falling apart. My relationship was falling apart, and the harder I tried to control things, the more they slipped through my fingers. I drove to my childhood church, a place I'd been attending sporadically but without real engagement. I was too busy controlling my life to actually surrender to God. It was a Wednesday evening, so the building was mostly empty. I sat in the sanctuary surrounded by silence, and for the first time in years, I let myself feel how exhausted I was. Exhausted from planning every detail, exhausted from trying to predict every outcome, exhausted from believing I could control my life through sheer willpower and meticulous organization. I put my head in my hands and started to cry. Not polite tears, but deep, gasping sobs. God, I'm so tired. I've been trying so hard to make everything work, to control every outcome, to ensure nothing goes wrong, but I'm failing. I can't hold it all together. I don't know what to do. I sat there broken, finally admitting what I'd been avoiding. I wasn't in control. I'd never been in control. All my planning, all my managing, all my careful organization, it was all an illusion. And then, in the quietest, most gentle way, I heard something that stopped my spiraling completely, not audibly, but with absolute clarity in my spirit. Words so simple, so profound, so challenging that they cut through every defense I'd built. Let go of control. I am the one who sustains your life. I froze. The words settled over me with both comfort and terror. Let go of control, the very thing I'd built my entire identity around, the thing that made me feel safe, competent, successful. I am the one who sustains your life, not my planning, not my spreadsheets, not my meticulous management. God. But God, I whispered, if I let go of control, everything will fall apart. And then I heard it again, even clearer. Let go of control. I am the one who sustains your life. You never had control. You only had the illusion of it. Trust me. I sat in that pew for a long time, wrestling with those words. Everything in me wanted to reject them, to argue, to explain why I needed control. But deep down, I knew they were true. I'd been exhausting myself trying to sustain my own life, trying to force outcomes through planning and control. And it wasn't working. It had never worked. When I finally stood to leave, I felt different. Not fixed, not suddenly free from my need for control, but aware of how much I'd been carrying that was never mine to carry. Driving home, I thought about God's words. Let go of control. It sounded simple, but I knew it would be the hardest thing I'd ever done. My entire life was built on control. My career, my routines, my relationships, my faith, all of it organized around the belief that if I just managed things well enough, planned thoroughly enough, everything would work out. But God was saying something radically different. He was saying I didn't need to control outcomes because He was already sustaining my life. My job wasn't to manage everything. It was to trust Him. At home, I opened my laptop and looked at all my spreadsheets. Budget tracking, meal plans, workout schedules, relationship metrics, career timelines, 5-year plans. None of it was inherently bad. But I'd turned it into something else, a way to feel in control of a life I couldn't actually control. I pulled out my Bible, dusty from neglect. I didn't even know where to start reading, but I flipped through until I landed on Proverbs 16:9. In their hearts, humans plan their course, but the Lord establishes their steps. I'd been so focused on planning my course that I'd forgotten God was the one establishing my steps. I'd been trying to control the destination when God was asking me to trust Him with the journey. I started journaling, something I'd never done because I couldn't see how to optimize it or make it productive. God told me to let go of control tonight. He said He's the one who sustains my life. I don't know how to do that. Control is all I know. It's how I feel safe. It's how I feel competent. Without it, I'm terrified of what might happen. But I'm also exhausted. Exhausted from trying to manage everything. Exhausted from believing it all depends on me. Exhausted from the anxiety that comes from knowing deep down that I can't actually control outcomes, no matter how hard I try. I don't know what letting go looks like, but I know I can't keep living like this. Something has to change. That night, I did something I hadn't done in years. Instead of planning the next day in meticulous detail, instead of reviewing my schedules and timelines and goals, I simply prayed, God, I don't know how to let go of control, but I'm willing to learn. Help me trust that you're sustaining my life. Help me rest in your sovereignty instead of exhausting myself trying to play God. I didn't feel immediate peace. I didn't feel suddenly free from my need for control. But I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. A tiny seed of hope. Hope that maybe there was a different way to live. Hope that maybe God really could sustain my life better than I could. Hope that maybe letting go of control wasn't the disaster I feared, but the freedom I desperately needed. As I drifted off to sleep, those words echoed in my mind. Let go of control. I am the one who sustains your life. I didn't know it yet, but those words were about to transform everything. The week after hearing God's voice, I faced my first real test. Marcus called again about the CFO position at his startup. Ethan, I need an answer by Friday. This is your last chance. The old me would have spent the week analyzing every scenario, trying to predict every outcome, demanding certainty before deciding. Instead, I prayed, God, you're already in my future. Whether I take this job or stay where I am, you're already there. Help me trust your presence more than I trust my predictions. I made a list of pros and cons, talked it through with Claire, and then made a decision based on what felt right, not what felt certain. I called Marcus on Wednesday. I'm in. Let's do this. Really? You're not going to need another week to analyze it? No. I'm learning that I'll never have perfect information about the future, but I trust that God's already there, so I can move forward despite uncertainty. I don't know what happened to you, but I like this version better. My current boss was understanding when I gave notice. You're making a risky choice, but I respect it. Sometimes the biggest risk is not taking any risks. The 2 weeks before starting the new job were filled with anxiety. What if I'd made the wrong choice? What if the startup failed? What if I regretted leaving a stable position? But every time the fear tried to take over, I remembered God is already in that future. Not God will be there if I need him. God is already there. That distinction mattered. It meant the future I was stepping into wasn't a void. It was a space God already occupied. Claire noticed the change in me. You seem calmer, less paralyzed. I'm still scared about the future, but I'm learning to trust that God's already in it, so I don't have to predict it perfectly before moving forward. What about us? About our future? I'd been thinking about that. I want to take you to dinner this weekend, somewhere nice. I have something I want to ask you. Her eyes widened. Ethan, I'm not saying what, but I want you to know I'm not paralyzed anymore. I'm ready to move forward. And in that weekend, I took her to the restaurant where we'd had our first date 5 years ago. I'd thought about waiting, about analyzing more, about being absolutely certain, but I realized I'd never be absolutely certain, and that was okay, because God was already in our future. Claire, I've been a terrible boyfriend for the past year. I've let fear of the future keep me from committing to you, but I'm done with that. I love you, and I want to build a future with you. I got down on one knee right there in the restaurant. I don't know how everything will work out. I don't have perfect certainty about the future, but I know God's already there, and I know I want you by my side as I step into it. Will you marry me? She was crying and laughing. Yes, of course, yes. The restaurant applauded, and I felt a freedom I'd never experienced, making a major life decision despite uncertainty, trusting that God was already in whatever came next. Starting at the startup was intense. Long hours, high pressure, building financial systems from scratch. There were moments I questioned my decision, but I kept reminding myself, God is already in this. Whether it succeeds or fails, He's already there. Marcus appreciated my leadership style. You're calm under pressure. Most CFOs I've worked with panic when things are uncertain. You seem at peace with uncertainty. I'm learning that uncertainty doesn't mean God's absent. It just means I can't see what He can already see. The company faced early challenges, cash flow issues, clients backing out, competitors emerging. The old me would have spiraled into anxiety about whether I'd made the wrong choice. Instead, I focused on doing my job well and trusting that God was already in whatever outcome resulted. Claire and I started wedding planning. She wanted something simple. I wanted to support her vision without trying to control every detail. One evening she said, "You're being really flexible about all this. I expected you to have spreadsheets and timelines and backup plans. I probably would have a year ago, but I'm learning that trying to control every detail of the future just exhausts me. I'd rather be present in the planning process and trust that God's already in our wedding day, whether everything goes perfectly or not." I really like this version of you. At church, I shared my testimony briefly during a service. The pastor had asked if anyone wanted to share how God had been working in their life. "I've struggled with fear of the future for years," I told the congregation, "paralyzed by uncertainty, unable to make decisions because I couldn't predict outcomes. But God told me something that changed everything. My future is not uncertain because He's already there. I don't need to see the future. I just need to trust that God's already in it." After the service, several people approached me. Most shared their own struggles with fear of the future. One older man said, "I'm 65 and still paralyzed by fear of the future, afraid of retirement, afraid of aging, afraid of what comes next. Hearing you say God's already there, that helps." A young woman told me, "I've been putting off applying to grad school because I'm terrified it won't work out. But you're right, God's already in that future. I can take the step without knowing exactly how it will turn out." These conversations reminded me that fear of an uncertain future wasn't unique to me. Many people were stuck, unable to move forward, waiting for certainty that would never come. My therapist, Dr. Chen, noticed the change. "You seem different, less anxious about decisions." I've shifted how I think about the future. I used to see it as uncertain, which made it terrifying. Now I see it as already inhabited by God, which makes it less scary. That's a significant cognitive shift. How's it affecting your decision-making? I'm making decisions based on wisdom and values instead of trying to predict outcomes. I'm okay with not knowing how things will turn out because I trust that God's already in whatever happens. That's mature faith. Most people think faith means having certainty, but real faith is trusting despite uncertainty. At work, the startup hit a major milestone, secured Series A funding. The company was going to survive and grow. Marcus was ecstatic. "We did it, and you're a big part of why. Your calm leadership helped us navigate the uncertainty. But I also knew things could still change. Startups failed even after funding. Success wasn't guaranteed. The difference was, I didn't need that guarantee. I could celebrate the present success without demanding certainty about future success." Claire and I set a wedding date, 6 months away. Quick by most standards, but we'd already been together 5 years. We knew each other well. Planning the wedding brought up fears. What if I got cold feet? What if we realized we weren't compatible? What if marriage changed everything? But I recognized these as anxiety about an uncertain future, and I had a response now. God is already in our marriage. Not God will help us if we struggle. God is already there, already in every year ahead. One night I couldn't sleep. Wedding anxiety, work stress, general uncertainty about the future. I got up and sat on the couch, praying. "God, I'm scared. I know you said you're already in my future, but I still can't see it, and not seeing it still scares me sometimes." As I sat in the darkness, I felt a peace settle over me. Not answers to my questions, but a sense of presence. God wasn't just in my distant future, He was here now, in my present uncertainty. I wrote in my journal, "I'm learning that God being in my future doesn't mean I stop feeling afraid of uncertainty. It means I have someone to trust when fear comes." The future still feels uncertain to me, but it's not truly uncertain because God is already there, and that's enough. The next morning, I had coffee with my friend James, who I'd known since college. He was struggling with career decisions. "I don't know whether to stay at my current job or take a new opportunity. I can't decide because I don't know how either choice will work out." I shared what I'd learned. You'll never know for certain, but God knows. He's already in both possible futures. So the question isn't which choice guarantees the best outcome. It's which choice aligns with my values and calling, trusting that God's already in whatever future it leads to. That actually helps. I've been waiting for certainty I'll never have. Me too, for years. But I'm learning that faith means moving forward despite uncertainty, trusting that God's already where I'm going. At my next therapy session, I processed a setback. The startup had lost a major client, and our financial projections were off. I'm disappointed and a little scared that maybe I made the wrong choice leaving my stable job. Dr. Chen asked, "Are you spiraling into catastrophic thinking about the future?" Not as much as I would have before. I'm disappointed about the present situation, but I'm not convinced it means disaster ahead, because I believe God's already in our future, whether the company succeeds or struggles. That's healthy resilience. You're experiencing setback without letting it trigger overwhelming fear about the future. Claire and I had our first real fight about wedding plans. She wanted to invite more people than I was comfortable with. I felt overwhelmed by the size of the celebration she envisioned. We ended the conversation frustrated with each other, and I felt fear creeping in. What if we can't resolve conflicts? What if marriage is harder than we expect? But I caught myself. These were fears about an uncertain future, and I had a truth to combat them. God is already in our marriage. Not just our wedding day, but our first year, our difficult conversations, our learning to navigate disagreements. I called Claire and apologized for getting defensive. "You're right that it's your wedding too. Let's find a compromise we're both happy with." "Thank you. I'm sorry too. I wasn't considering your feelings." We worked it out, and I realized this was practice for marriage. Learning to trust that God was in our future meant trusting through disagreements, through uncertainty about how to blend our preferences, through the unknown of merging our lives. That Sunday, my pastor preached about Abraham being called to go to a place he'd never seen. God didn't give Abraham a map, didn't show him the destination, just said, "Go, and I'll show you." And Abraham went, not because he could see the future, but because he trusted the God who could. After the service, I thought about how similar my journey was. God hadn't shown me how everything would work out. He'd just said, "I'm already in your future, trust me." And slowly, I was learning to do exactly that. Trust God's presence in my future more than I trusted my ability to predict it. The future still felt uncertain to me. I still couldn't see how things would turn out, but I was learning that not being able to see the future didn't mean it was uncertain. It just meant I wasn't God. And God, who was already in my future, was trustworthy, even when I couldn't see what He could already see. 6 months after God spoke to me, Claire and I got married. The wedding wasn't perfect. The flowers arrived late, my best man forgot the rings momentarily, and it rained during our outdoor ceremony. But standing there with Claire, reciting vows about a future we couldn't see, I felt profound peace. God was already in our marriage, in our first year, our first fight, our first challenge. Already there. "I promise to love you," I said, "through futures I can't predict, trusting that God's already in every tomorrow we'll face together." Claire squeezed my hand, tears in her eyes. She understood what that meant, how far I'd come from the man paralyzed by fear of the future. The honeymoon in Costa Rica was our first real test of my new mindset. We'd planned activities but kept things flexible. When rain cancelled our ziplining, instead of panicking about ruined plans, we explored a local market we'd never have discovered otherwise. "Look at you being spontaneous," Claire teased. "I'm learning that the best experiences often aren't the ones I tried to control." Back home, we moved into our first apartment together, merging lives, figuring out rhythms, learning each other's habits. The old me would have been anxious about every adjustment, worried about whether we were compatible. Instead, I reminded myself, God is already in our marriage, already in the hard conversations, the adjustments, the learning curve. At work, the startup continued growing but faced intense competition. Marcus was stressed about whether we'd survive in the market. What if we can't compete? What if we made bad strategic decisions? I'd had the same fears just months ago. We made the best decisions we could with the information we had. Now we execute and trust that God's already in whatever outcome results. You've become really zen about uncertainty, not zen. Just learning to trust that God's already in the future so I don't have to control it. Claire got offered a promotion that would require relocating to San Francisco. It was an incredible opportunity, significant raise, leadership position, career advancement. But it meant I'd have to leave my job at the startup just as we were gaining momentum. We'd have to leave Seattle, our church, our community. The old me would have been paralyzed, unable to decide, demanding certainty about which path was better. Instead, we prayed together. God, you're already in both futures, us staying or us going. Show us which path aligns with your will. We talked through logistics, finances, career impacts, but ultimately we made a decision without perfect certainty. Claire should take the promotion, and we'd move. Telling Marcus was hard. I hate to leave, but this is the right move for Claire's career. I understand. You've built solid systems here. We'll be okay. And maybe this is God's timing for something new for you too. His graciousness made the transition easier, and I realized this was what trusting God in the future looked like. Making decisions despite uncertainty, believing he was already in whatever came next. Moving to San Francisco was chaotic. Finding an apartment, settling into a new city, Claire starting her new job. I was unemployed for the first time since college, which triggered old fears. What if I couldn't find a good job? What if we'd made a mistake? What if moving destroyed the momentum we'd built? But I kept returning to the truth. God is already in this, already in my next job, already in our new life here, already working in ways I can't see yet. I started looking for CFO positions. Several companies were interested, but nothing felt quite right. Weeks turned into months of searching. Claire was supportive, but I could sense her stress. "Are you worried?" I asked one evening. "A little. Not about money. We're okay. But I wonder if we made a mistake moving." "I've wondered that too, but I keep coming back to what God showed me. He's already in our future here. We made the best decision we could. Now we trust Him with how it unfolds." I need to hear that. I've been anxious about whether we did the right thing. We did the faithful thing. We took a step based on wisdom and calling, trusting God was already in it. That's all we can do. During the job search, I connected with a non-profit that provided financial literacy training to underserved communities. They needed a CFO, but couldn't match corporate salaries. I'd never considered non-profit work, but something about their mission resonated with me. I prayed about it extensively. This wasn't the career path I'd envisioned. It was lower pay, different work, serving a mission rather than maximizing profit. But I felt God nudging me toward it. God, if you're already in this future, show me clearly. I interviewed with the nonprofit's founder, Maria. She shared their vision passionately, helping people escape poverty through financial education. "We can't pay what you're worth in the corporate world," she admitted, "but the impact is profound. We've helped thousands of families build stable financial futures." Driving home, I felt clarity I'd rarely experienced. This was where God was leading, not where I'd planned, but where He'd already been working. I discussed it with Claire. "The pay cut is significant. It means adjusting our lifestyle, but it aligns with your values, and we can make it work financially." "You're sure?" This affects you too. I trust you. And I trust that if God's leading you there, He's already in that future. I accepted the position. Starting at the non-profit felt like coming home to work I was meant to do. Maria told me, "You could have made so much more elsewhere. Why choose this?" Because I'm learning that the best future isn't the one I can predict or control. It's the one God's already in. And I sense He's already in this work. The job was fulfilling in ways my previous positions hadn't been. Helping families understand finances, watching them build stability, seeing the direct impact of the work. But it was also challenging. Limited resources, difficult situations, people whose financial crises triggered their own fears about the future. One client, Jennifer, was a single mom drowning in debt. "I can't see any way out," she cried during a counseling session. "My future feels hopeless." I shared my own journey. A year ago, I was paralyzed by fear of an uncertain future. But I learned something that changed everything. God is already in your future, not He'll help you someday. He's already there, already working, already making a way you can't see yet. How do I believe that when everything looks impossible? You take one step, one faithful step towards stability, trusting that God's already in the next step and the one after that. You don't need to see the whole path. You just need to trust that He's already on it. 3 months later, Jennifer came back. "I did what you said. I took one step, made a budget, then another, talked to creditors, then another, and slowly I'm seeing a way forward I couldn't see before." That's exactly how it works. God reveals the path as you walk it, not before. These counseling sessions reminded me why I'd learned about trusting God with the future, not just for myself, but to help others find the same freedom. Claire and I settled into San Francisco life, found a church, made friends, established routines. But we also faced new challenges. Her job was more demanding than expected. I was adjusting to non-profit work. The cost of living stressed our finances. One particularly hard evening, we both broke down. "I don't know if we made the right choice moving here," Claire said through tears. "I've had the same doubts. This is harder than I expected." So what do? We remember that God's already in this. He was already here when we made the decision to move. He's already in our hard days. He's already working in ways we can't see yet. We trust Him through the difficulty. That's not easy. No. But it's all we can do, and it's enough. We started a habit that night. Every evening we'd share one way we'd seen God's presence that day. Not necessarily solving problems, just being present. It shifted our perspective from, "Is this working out?" to "God is already in this." At my 1-year wedding anniversary, I reflected on how much had changed. A year ago, I was terrified of getting married because I couldn't predict the future. Now I was married, living in a new city, working a job I'd never planned for. And I was at peace, not because I knew how everything would work out, but because I trusted that God was already in every tomorrow. Claire and I celebrated quietly, just the two of us. "Thank you for taking a chance on me," I told her. "Thank you for learning to step into the future despite your fears. I'm still learning. Still have moments where I want certainty about what's ahead, but I'm getting better at trusting that God's already there." That night, I updated my journal. 1 year since God spoke. 1 year of learning to trust His presence in my future more than my ability to predict it. The future still feels uncertain sometimes, but I'm learning it's not truly uncertain. God's already in it. And that changes how I approach every decision, every fear, every unknown tomorrow. I thought about all the decisions I'd made in the past year, proposing, changing jobs, moving cities, taking lower pay for meaningful work. None of them had guaranteed outcomes. All of them required trust, but God had been faithful. Not always in ways I'd predicted or preferred, but faithful nonetheless. And I was learning that His faithfulness in tomorrow was as certain as His presence today, because He was already there. 2 years after God spoke to me, Claire told me she was pregnant. The news brought simultaneous joy and terror. "We're going to be parents," she said, watching my face carefully. I felt every old fear trying to resurface. What if I wasn't a good father? What if something went wrong during pregnancy? What if we couldn't handle parenting? But I also knew how to respond now. God's already in our baby's future, already in our parenting journey, already holding what we can't see yet. Are you scared? Terrified, but not paralyzed? There's a difference. Pregnancy brought 9 months of uncertainty. Every doctor's appointment triggered anxiety until we heard everything was fine. Every stage brought new worries about what could go wrong. But I was learning to sit with uncertainty without demanding it be resolved, to acknowledge fear without letting it control me. At work, the non-profit expanded significantly. We opened 3 new locations and needed to scale operations rapidly. As CFO, I was responsible for ensuring financial sustainability through this growth. The old me would have been consumed with trying to predict every outcome, control every variable, ensure perfect certainty before making decisions. Instead, I built solid systems, made wise projections, and then trusted that God was already in whatever results came from our growth. Maria noticed, "You're remarkably calm during this expansion. Most CFOs would be panicking about all the uncertainty. I'm not calm because I have certainty. I'm calm because I trust that God's already in our future, whether we succeed or struggle." One of our new locations struggled financially. We were losing money, and I had to decide whether to keep funding it or close it down. I analyzed the numbers, consulted with leadership, prayed extensively. The data suggested closing it, but I felt led to give it more time. It was a decision without certainty. We might lose more money. But I felt God was already in that location's future, working in ways I couldn't see yet. 6 months later, the location turned around completely. New leadership, community partnerships, and a shift in programming made it not only sustainable, but our most impactful site. Maria said, "You made a decision I wouldn't have made, but you were right." I wasn't certain I was right. I just trusted that God was already in that location's future, so I could give it more time despite the uncertainty. Claire's pregnancy progressed normally, but we faced decisions that triggered my old patterns. Genetic testing, birth plans, childcare arrangements. Each decision felt weighty because it affected our child's future. "Should we do the additional genetic testing?" Claire asked. The old me would have analyzed every possibility, tried to gather perfect information, demanded certainty before deciding. Instead, we talked it through and made a decision. Let's do it. Not because we need to know everything about the future, but because it's wise information to have. When the results came back clear, I felt relief. But I also noticed something. I hadn't spiraled during the waiting period, hadn't catastrophized about what we might discover. I was learning to wait in uncertainty without letting fear consume me. Our daughter Lily was born on a Tuesday morning. The delivery didn't go as planned. Labor was longer than expected. Claire needed intervention, and I spent hours feeling completely helpless. But holding Lily for the first time, I felt overwhelming peace. God was already in her future. In her childhood, her teenage years, her adult life. Already holding her, already working in her life. "She's perfect," Claire said, exhausted but radiant. "She is, and God's already in her entire future." The first few months of parenthood were harder than I'd imagined. Sleep deprivation, constant anxiety about whether we were doing things right, fear about Lily's health and development. Every cry triggered worry. Every pediatrician visit brought anxiety until we heard she was developing normally. But I kept returning to the truth. God is already in Lily's future. I don't have to control every aspect of her development to ensure she'll be okay. God's already holding her tomorrows. Claire struggled with postpartum anxiety. She couldn't sleep even when Lily slept, constantly worried something would happen. What if she stops breathing? What if I make a mistake? What if something's wrong and we don't catch it? I recognized the pattern, fear of an uncertain future spiraling into paralyzing anxiety. "Claire, God's already in Lily's future. We can be responsible parents without trying to control every outcome. We can't prevent every possible problem. We can only do our best and trust that God's holding what we can't control. How did you learn to do that? By being forced to. By hitting the point where my need for certainty about the future was destroying my present. By hearing God say He was already in my future, so I didn't have to see it perfectly to trust it. We got Claire connected with a therapist who specialized in postpartum anxiety. And she started practicing the same principles I'd learned, acknowledging fear without letting it control her, trusting God's presence in the future instead of demanding certainty about outcomes. At work, I started a financial literacy program specifically for new parents, teaching them budgeting, planning for childcare costs, preparing for the financial realities of raising children. One participant, Michael, asked, "How do you plan for all the financial unknowns of parenting? There are so many things that could go wrong, so many unexpected costs." You plan responsibly, based on what you know, but you also accept that you can't plan for every possibility. You build flexibility into your budget and trust that you'll handle what comes as it comes. That sounds irresponsible. Actually, trying to plan for every possible future expense is what's irresponsible. It creates anxiety-driven decisions instead of wisdom-driven ones. Responsible planning includes accepting uncertainty. These sessions reminded me that my journey wasn't just personal. It was preparing me to help others navigate the same fears I'd overcome. Lily turned 6 months old. Watching her grow, I felt constant tension between wanting to protect her from everything and needing to let her experience life. When she started crawling, my instinct was to baby-proof every inch of our home, eliminate every possible danger. Claire stopped me. We can't protect her from everything. We create a safe environment, but we also let her explore. What if she gets hurt? She will get hurt. That's part of growing up. Our job isn't to prevent all pain. It's to be there when it happens. Her wisdom echoed what I'd learned about the future. I couldn't control every outcome to protect Lily. I could only trust that God was already in her future, holding her through both joys and struggles. The non-profit reached a major milestone, helped 10,000 families achieve financial stability. We celebrated with a gala where several families shared their stories. One woman, Sandra, shared, "2 years ago I was bankrupt and hopeless. The staff here didn't just teach me budgeting, they taught me to trust God with my future, to take one faithful step at a time without needing to see the whole path. Today I'm debt-free, I have savings, and I'm helping other families learn what I learned." Hearing her testimony, I realized how far-reaching the message was. What God had taught me about trusting His presence in the future wasn't just personal. It was transformative for anyone who learned it. That year, my dad got sick. Cancer, aggressive form. The prognosis was uncertain. Treatment might work or it might not. All my old fears resurfaced. What if he died? What if treatment failed? What if our time together was limited? But I also knew how to respond. I flew home immediately, not waiting for certainty about his prognosis, not needing to see how it would turn out before being present. "Dad, I don't know what's ahead, but I know God's already in your future, so I'm here, whatever comes." He grabbed my hand. "Thank you. I'm scared about what's next." "Me too. But we don't have to see the future to trust that God's already in it." Over the following months, I flew home regularly, sat with Dad during treatments, had conversations we'd put off, made memories without knowing how many we'd have left. He went into remission after 6 months, but the experience taught me something profound. Being present in uncertain futures was more valuable than demanding certainty about outcomes. "Thank you for showing up," Dad said after his last treatment, "for not waiting to see if I'd survive before being present. God taught me that His presence in the future is more certain than any outcome I try to predict. So I can be present now, trusting He's already in whatever comes next." Back in San Francisco, I reflected on 2 years of learning to trust God's presence in my future. Marriage, career change, cross-country move, parenthood, Dad's illness, all of it uncertain, all of it requiring trust. But through it all, God had been faithful. Not always in ways I'd predicted, not always preventing difficulty, but always present, always working, always already in my tomorrow before I got there. Claire and I celebrated our second anniversary with Lily sleeping in the next room. 2 years ago, you almost couldn't marry me because you were paralyzed by fear of the future. I know. I'm so glad I learned to step forward, despite not being able to see how it would turn out. What's different now? Do you not fear the future anymore? I still feel uncertainty about what's ahead, but I don't let that uncertainty paralyze me, because I know God's already in whatever future we're stepping into, and that's enough. That night, I wrote in my journal, 2 years of learning to trust. The future still feels uncertain to me sometimes, but I'm learning that my inability to see the future doesn't mean it's uncertain, it just means I'm not God. He's already there, already working, already holding every tomorrow I'll face, and trusting His presence in my future is better than demanding certainty about outcomes. I thought about Lily sleeping peacefully, unaware of all the uncertain tomorrows ahead of her, and I felt deep peace knowing God was already in every one of them, not because I could see her future, but because I knew God could, and that was more than enough. 5 years after God spoke to me, I was asked to speak at a conference for young professionals struggling with anxiety about their futures. Standing before 500 people, I shared my journey from paralysis to trust. 5 years ago, I couldn't make decisions because I demanded certainty about outcomes. I lost opportunities, almost lost my relationship, and exhausted myself trying to predict and control the future. I shared about that night in the church parking lot, about God's words, about learning to trust His presence in my future more than my ability to predict it. The future still feels uncertain to me sometimes, but I've learned it's not truly uncertain. God's already there, and trusting His presence in tomorrow is better than demanding to see all of tomorrow before I'll step into it. After the talk, dozens of people approached me. Most shared their own paralyzing fear of the future. One young man, Trevor, told me through tears, "I've turned down 3 job offers because I can't decide which one is right. I'm terrified of choosing wrong and ruining my future." Can I tell you something? There probably isn't one right choice. There are likely multiple good paths, and God's already in all of them. The question isn't which choice guarantees the best outcome. It's which choice aligns with my values and calling, trusting God's already there. But what if I choose and it turns out badly? Then God's already in that too, already working in it, already redeeming it, already using it for your growth. Your job isn't to predict outcomes perfectly. It's to make wise decisions and trust God with results. These conversations reminded me why I'd learned this lesson, not just for myself, but to help others find the same freedom. At home, Lily was now 3 years old, full of personality and questions. She asked about everything, including the future. "Daddy, what will I be when I grow up?" The old me would have felt anxiety about her uncertain future. Instead, I smiled. "I don't know, sweetheart, but God already knows, and He's already in your future, making it beautiful." Is God everywhere? Yes, even in tomorrow. Even in all your tomorrows that haven't happened yet. Her simple faith reminded me that trusting God in the future shouldn't be complicated, just childlike trust that He's already there. Claire and I found out we were pregnant again. This time, the news brought less fear and more excitement. I'd learned enough by now to trust that God was already in this new baby's future. But the pregnancy brought complications. Claire developed gestational diabetes and needed careful monitoring. Every appointment brought potential bad news, yet I found myself more peaceful than during the first pregnancy. Not because I had more certainty, but because I'd practiced trusting God's presence in uncertainty for 5 years. "Aren't you worried?" Claire asked after a particularly concerning appointment. "I am, but I'm not consumed by worry. I'm choosing to trust that God's already in this pregnancy, in our baby's future, in whatever outcomes we face. That's growth. 5 years ago, you would have been spiraling. At work, the non-profit faced a funding crisis. Our largest donor withdrew support unexpectedly, leaving a massive budget gap. The board met in emergency session. Some wanted to cut programs drastically, others suggested closing locations. Everyone was anxious about the organization's future. I presented the financial reality honestly. We have 6 months of operating reserves. We need to cut costs, but we also need to trust that God's already in our future. He's sustained this organization for 20 years. I believe He's already working on provision we can't see yet. That's faith, not finance, one board member objected. Actually, it's both. Faith says God's already in our future. Finance says we plan responsibly while we trust. We make wise cuts, we fundraise aggressively, and we trust that God's already working on solutions we haven't discovered yet. Over the following months, we did cut costs, but we also saw unexpected provision. New donors emerged, grants came through, community support increased. By month 6, we'd closed the funding gap. Maria told me, "Your calm leadership through that crisis steadied everyone. How did you stay so peaceful?" Because I've learned that God's already in our future. Whether we'd survived that crisis or closed down, He was already there. That doesn't mean I didn't work hard or plan responsibly. It means I worked and planned without being consumed by fear of the future. Our son Jacob was born healthy despite the pregnancy complications. Holding him, I felt the same profound peace I'd felt with Lily. God was already in His entire future. But having 2 children brought new challenges. The logistics were harder. The finances were tighter. The stress on our marriage was greater. One particularly hard evening, with both kids crying and Claire and I both exhausted, I felt overwhelmed. "I don't know if we can do this," I admitted to Claire, after the kids finally went to sleep. "Do what?" "Raise 2 kids well. Handle all the unknowns, navigate all the decisions ahead. God's already in all of it, right? That's what you always say." She was right. I'd learned this lesson but needed to keep applying it. You're right. God's already in our parenting journey, in the hard nights and the beautiful moments, in all the decisions ahead. We don't have to see the whole path, we just have to trust He's already on it. That year I was invited to write a book about trusting God with an uncertain future. The publisher had heard about my conference talks and wanted to expand the message. Writing the book forced me to articulate everything I'd learned. Not just the theological truth that God's already in the future, but the practical application of that truth to daily life. One chapter I titled, "The Difference Between Wise Planning and Anxious Prediction." In it, I wrote, "Wise planning prepares responsibly for likely scenarios. Anxious prediction tries to see and control every possible outcome. We're called to the first, not the second." Another chapter explored living in the tension of trust and responsibility. The truth that God's already in our future doesn't mean we make reckless decisions. It means we make responsible decisions without being paralyzed by uncertainty. Claire read the manuscript. "This is going to help so many people. You've articulated what so many feel but can't express." The book came out the following year. The response was overwhelming. Thousands of people shared how it freed them from paralyzing fear of the future. One email particularly moved me. "I've been in therapy for anxiety about the future for 3 years. Your book gave me the missing piece. God's already there. My therapist says my progress in the past month has been remarkable. Thank you." These responses confirmed that what God had taught me wasn't just personal. It was a message many people desperately needed. But the book also brought criticism. Some accused me of promoting passivity, of teaching people not to plan or prepare. "You're telling people to be irresponsible," one reviewer wrote, "to just trust God instead of planning wisely." The criticism stung, but I also recognized it as misunderstanding my message. I wasn't teaching passivity, I was teaching trust alongside responsibility. I wrote a blog post responding, "Trusting that God's already in our future doesn't mean we don't plan. It means we plan without demanding certainty about outcomes. We prepare responsibly while acknowledging we can't control every variable. We make wise decisions while accepting that we can't predict every result. At church, I was asked to lead a small group for people struggling with anxiety about the future. The group grew quickly. Clearly the need was widespread. We studied scripture about God's presence in the future, practiced trusting despite uncertainty, and shared our struggles and victories. One participant, Rebecca, shared, "I've been unable to commit to anything, relationships, career moves, even small decisions, because I'm terrified of choosing wrong. Learning that God's already in my future is slowly giving me courage to move forward." Another, James, said, "My anxiety about my kids' futures was destroying my ability to enjoy parenting. I'm learning to trust that God's already in their tomorrows, so I can be present in their today." These testimonies reminded me that the freedom I'd found was available to everyone willing to trust. Lily started kindergarten. Watching her walk into that classroom, I felt the familiar tension, wanting to protect her from everything versus needing to let her experience life. What if she struggles? What if kids are mean? What if she doesn't thrive? Claire took my hand. God's already in her kindergarten year, already in her school experience, already holding what we can't control. She was right, and I was grateful to have a partner who could remind me of what I'd learned when fear tried to take over. That evening, Lily came home excited about her first day, and I realized I'd spent energy worrying about a future God was already in, when I could have been peacefully trusting Him. "How was school?" I asked her. "So fun. I made a friend named Emma, and we played at recess." Her joy reminded me that God's presence in her future was more reliable than my fears about it. At my 5-year anniversary of hearing God's voice, I reflected on the journey. From a man paralyzed by uncertainty to someone who could step forward despite not seeing the path clearly. I wrote in my journal, 5 years of learning to trust. The future still feels uncertain to me sometimes, but I've learned that my feeling of uncertainty doesn't mean the future is uncertain to God. He's already there, already working, already holding every tomorrow. And trusting His presence in my future is more powerful than demanding to see the future before I'll step into it. I thought about all the decisions I'd made: marriage, career changes, moving, kids, writing. None came with guaranteed outcomes. All required trust. But God had been faithful through every uncertainty, not always preventing difficulty, not always working in ways I'd predicted, but always present, always already in my tomorrow before I got there. And that presence, that profound, sustaining presence, had transformed how I lived. No longer paralyzed by fear of what I couldn't see, but freed to walk forward, trusting the one who could already see it all. 7 years after God spoke to me, I faced a decision that tested everything I'd learned. The non-profit's board offered me the executive director position. Maria was retiring, and they wanted me to lead the organization. It was an honor, but it was also terrifying. Leading the entire organization, not just finances, making strategic decisions that would affect hundreds of employees and thousands of clients, shaping the future of an organization I deeply cared about. The old me would have been paralyzed, unable to accept because I couldn't guarantee I'd succeed. The new me prayed, "God, you're already in this leadership role. Already in the decisions I'll make, already in the outcomes, whether I succeed brilliantly or fail spectacularly. Help me trust your presence more than I trust my predictions." I accepted the position, and with it, all the uncertainty that comes with leadership. My first year as executive director was humbling. I made mistakes. Some decisions didn't work out. Some initiatives failed. The learning curve was steep, but I was learning to lead, despite uncertainty, to make decisions without guaranteeing outcomes, to trust that God was already in both my successes and failures. One particularly difficult situation involved letting go a long-time staff member who wasn't performing well. I agonized over the decision. What if I'm wrong? What if there's a better way to help them improve? What if this damages the team culture? My mentor, a retired nonprofit leader, told me, leadership means making decisions despite uncertainty. You do your due diligence, you make the best call you can, and you trust that God's already in whatever results from that decision. And I had the difficult conversation. The staff member was hurt but understood, and the team actually became more energized with clearer accountability. But it taught me, even with good outcomes, leadership required stepping into uncertainty, trusting God was already there. At home, Lily was 7 and Jacob was 3. Both were developing their own personalities, facing their own challenges. Parenting them required constant decisions about schooling, activities, discipline, how to handle various situations, and every decision carried uncertainty about how it would affect their futures. Claire and I had to choose between public and private school for Lily. The private school offered smaller classes but stretched our budget. The public school was good but more crowded. We prayed, researched, discussed extensively. But ultimately, we had to decide without knowing which choice would be better for Lily's future. God's already in both options, Claire said. Which choice aligns with our values and what we sense is best for her? We chose the public school, not with perfect certainty, but with trust that God was already in Lily's educational future, regardless of which school she attended. The decision was right for us, though I occasionally wondered what would have happened if we'd chosen differently. But I was learning to release those what-if thoughts. God was in the path we chose, not the hypothetical paths we didn't. The small group I led continued growing. We now had 30 regular participants, all learning to trust God's presence in their uncertain futures. One member, David, shared a breakthrough. I've been putting off starting my business for 5 years because I'm terrified of failure. But I finally realized God's already in that business future. Whether it succeeds or fails, He's there. So I'm launching next month. Another member, Sarah, said, I've been afraid to have kids because I can't guarantee I'll be a good mother. But learning that God's already in my motherhood future is giving me courage to try. These testimonies never got old. Watching people find freedom from paralyzing fear of the future reminded me why God had taught me this lesson. But not everyone in the group embraced the message. Some wanted formulas for predicting the future, steps to guarantee certain outcomes. One man, Tom, kept asking, but how do I know which choice is right? How do I know what God wants me to do? You pray, you seek wisdom, you consider your gifts and calling, and then you make a decision, trusting that God's already in it. There's rarely one right choice. Often there are multiple good options, and God's already in all of them. That's not helpful. I need to know for certain. But that certainty doesn't exist, and seeking it keeps you stuck. God's asking you to trust His presence in your future, not to have perfect knowledge of outcomes before you move. Tom eventually left the group, unable to embrace trust over certainty. It reminded me that I couldn't force anyone to let go of demanding certainty. That was between them and God. At work, the organization faced a strategic decision: expand to new cities or deepen our impact in existing locations. Both options had merit. Both carried risks. The board debated for months. Some wanted aggressive expansion, others wanted cautious consolidation. I led them through a discernment process. We can't guarantee which choice will yield better outcomes, but we can pray, analyze what we know, and make the best decision we can, trusting that God's already in whichever future we choose. We decided to expand cautiously, one new city while strengthening existing programs. Not everyone agreed with the decision, but we moved forward united in trusting God's presence in our organizational future. The expansion was harder than expected. The new location struggled initially. Some board members questioned the decision, but I'd learned to lead through setbacks without spiraling into, did we choose wrong? Instead, we adjusted our approach, supported the struggling location, and trusted that God was already working in ways we couldn't see yet. 6 months later, the new location turned around, and the strengthening of existing programs yielded unexpected benefits. The decision, while imperfect in execution, proved wise overall. My dad's cancer returned. This time, the prognosis was grimmer. Treatment options were limited. Sitting with him in the hospital, I felt grief mixing with trust. I didn't want to lose him, but I also knew God was already in whatever future we faced, whether Dad recovered or died. "I'm scared, son," he admitted. "Me too, Dad, but God's already in your future. Whether it's years more with us or transition to eternity, He's already there." That's a comfort I didn't have the first time. Thank you for teaching me to trust. We had 3 more months together. Hard months, but also precious ones. I flew home weekly, sat with him, had conversations we might have delayed if we'd had more time. When he passed, I grieved deeply, but I also had peace. God had been in those final months with Dad, had given us time we might not have used well if we'd been guaranteed it. At the funeral I shared, "My dad taught me many things, but what he taught me at the end was most profound. You can face even death with peace when you trust that God's already in your future." Dad died knowing God was already in eternity, already preparing his place. That trust gave him peace, even in dying. Several people approached me afterward. Many shared their own fears about death, about uncertain futures beyond this life. One woman said, "I'm terrified of dying because I don't know what's next." Hearing you talk about God already being there, that helps. Even in grief, God was using what I'd learned to help others trust His presence in the most uncertain future of all, death and what lies beyond. Back home, I processed Dad's death while continuing to lead, parent, and live. It was hard, but not overwhelming. I'd learned to trust God's presence even in grief. Claire was my anchor. "Your dad would be proud of who you've become. From someone paralyzed by fear of the future to someone who can face even death with trust. I couldn't have done it without you, without God, without learning that the future isn't uncertain because He's already there." That year, my book was translated into 10 languages. The message was resonating globally. People everywhere struggled with paralyzing fear of uncertain futures. I received emails from around the world, from Japan. "Your book taught me I don't have to see my future to trust God with it." From Brazil, "I've been frozen by fear for years. You've shown me how to move forward." From Nigeria, "God used your words to free me from anxiety about tomorrow." These messages reminded me that what felt like a personal struggle was actually a universal human condition. And God's truth about being already in our futures was for everyone, not just me. At my 7-year anniversary of hearing God's voice, I reflected on the journey. So much had changed, career, family, even geography. But the core truth remained. God is already in my future. I wrote in my journal, 7 years of learning to trust. The future still holds uncertainty. I still can't see all of tomorrow, but I've learned that my inability to see doesn't mean God isn't already there. He's already in every tomorrow I'll face, already working, already holding, already present, and trusting that truth is better than demanding to see what He can already see. I thought about Dad, now in eternity, about Lily and Jacob growing up learning to trust God with their futures, about Claire, who'd walked this journey with me, about the thousands of people learning the same lesson. None of us could see the future, but all of us could trust the one who was already there. And that trust, that daily, practiced, hard-won trust, was changing everything. 10 years after God spoke to me, I received news that would have destroyed the old me. The non-profit was facing a major scandal. One of our regional directors had been embezzling funds for years. The financial damage was significant, but the reputational damage could be catastrophic. I sat in my office reading the forensic audit report, feeling the weight of leadership in crisis. Hundreds of employees depended on this organization. Thousands of families relied on our services. And now everything we'd built was at risk. The old Ethan would have spiraled into paralyzing anxiety. What if we couldn't recover? What if donors abandoned us? What if we had to close programs? What if this destroyed everything? But I'd learned something over 10 years. God was already in this crisis, already in whatever future emerged from it, already working in ways I couldn't see yet. I called an emergency board meeting. The room was tense. Board members were angry, scared, demanding answers I didn't have. How did this happen? How long has it been going on? What's our liability? Can we survive this? I answered their questions honestly. We had inadequate oversight. It's been happening for 3 years. Our liability is significant, and I don't know if we can survive this. The room erupted. Some wanted to fire everyone involved. Others wanted to quietly settle and hope no one noticed. Some were ready to abandon ship entirely. I let them process, then spoke. I understand your fear and anger. I feel it too, but we have a choice. We can panic and make reactive decisions, or we can trust that God's already in our future and respond with wisdom and integrity. This is a crisis, Ethan, not a time for platitudes about trust. It's not a platitude. It's how we navigate this. God's already in our organizational future. Whether we survive this or close down, whether we rebuild trust or lose it, He's already there. That doesn't mean we don't act. It means we act from trust rather than panic. Now, we decided on complete transparency. Press release acknowledging the embezzlement, full cooperation with authorities, independent audit of all our financials, and commitment to making victims whole. It was the right thing to do, but it was also risky. Media coverage was harsh. Donors were skeptical. Some pulled their support immediately. Claire found me at home one evening, staring at my laptop, reading negative articles about the organization. How are you holding up? I'm scared. This could destroy everything we've built. 10 years of work could be gone. But God's already in that future, right? Whether the organization survives or doesn't. I closed my laptop. You're right. I needed to hear that. God's already in whatever future emerges from this crisis. My job is to lead with integrity through it, not to guarantee a specific outcome. The investigation uncovered painful truths. The embezzlement was worse than we'd initially thought. Several staff members had suspected something but hadn't reported it. Our internal controls were woefully inadequate. We had to let go multiple people, not just those involved in the embezzlement, but those who'd failed to maintain proper oversight. Each termination was painful, knowing these were people with families, mortgages, responsibilities. One night, I broke down. God, I'm trying to trust that you're in our future, but I'm making decisions that are destroying people's present. How do I reconcile that? I didn't hear an audible answer, but I sensed clarity. Trust means doing the right thing even when outcomes are uncertain and consequences are painful. God's presence in the future doesn't guarantee comfort in the present. It guarantees His presence through difficulty. Maria, now retired but still invested in the organization, called regularly to check on me. How are you really doing? Exhausted, heartbroken, angry at the betrayal, scared about the future, but also, strangely, at peace. I know God's already in whatever emerges from this. That doesn't make it easy, but it makes it bearable. You've grown so much. 10 years ago, you couldn't make decisions because you demanded certainty. Now you're leading through a crisis without any certainty at all, because I've learned the future isn't uncertain to God. I may not see it, but He's already there, and that's enough. The media attention brought unexpected support. Other nonprofits reached out, sharing their own experiences with financial crises. Donors who'd initially pulled support came back after seeing our transparency. Families we'd helped rallied to defend the organization. One woman, Jennifer, the same single mom I'd counseled years ago about trusting God with her financial future, spoke at a press conference. This organization changed my life. Yes, they made mistakes. But look at their response. Complete honesty, full accountability, commitment to making it right. That's the kind of integrity that made them trustworthy in the first place. Her testimony shifted the narrative. The story became less about the embezzlement and more about how we were responding to it. At home, Lily was now 10 and asking deep questions about the crisis. She'd heard kids at school talking about it. "Dad, is your organization going to close?" "I don't know, sweetheart. But I know God's already in our future, whether we stay open or close." "Are you scared?" "Yes, but I'm also trusting God. Being scared and trusting aren't opposites. They're companions. I can feel fear and still choose trust. That's what you always teach me, to trust God even when I can't see how things will work out." Her words humbled me. My daughter was watching me live what I'd been teaching, and that responsibility motivated me to keep choosing trust, even when fear was loud. Jacob, now 6, was too young to fully understand, but sensed the stress. He became clingy, had more tantrums, needed extra reassurance. One night, putting him to bed, he asked, "Daddy, will everything be okay?" How do you answer that for a 6-year-old? I couldn't guarantee everything would be okay, but I could offer something better. "I don't know what will happen, buddy, but I know God's with us. He's already in tomorrow, and that means we're safe, even when things are hard." Promise! I promise God's with us, and that's the most important thing. The non-profit implemented massive reforms. New financial controls, independent audits, whistleblower protections, board oversight restructuring. It was painful and expensive, but necessary. Some long-time staff resented the changes. "We're being treated like criminals because of one person's actions." I understood their frustration. I know this feels excessive, but we failed in our oversight. We have to rebuild trust, and that requires demonstrating we've changed how we operate. 6 months into the crisis, we faced another decision: expand or contract. Some board members wanted to close struggling programs to stabilize finances. Others wanted to maintain all services to show strength. I led the discussion. We can't make this decision based on fear or on ego. We have to ask, which choice aligns with our mission and values, trusting that God's already in whichever future we choose. After extensive discernment, we decided to close one location and redirect those resources to strengthen remaining programs. It was painful. Staff lost jobs, families lost services. But it was the wise choice given our circumstances. The old me would have agonized over whether we'd decided correctly, would have catastrophized about what closing that location might mean. The new me grieved the necessary loss while trusting that God was already in the future that emerged from this difficult decision. Claire started seeing a therapist that year. The stress of my crisis at work, combined with parenting 2 kids and her own demanding job, had taken a toll. "I'm anxious all the time," she admitted. "Worried about money, about your job security, about how this is affecting the kids. I can't sleep. I'm so sorry. I've been so focused on the organizational crisis that I didn't see you were struggling. It's not your fault, but I need help. I can't just tell myself God's in the future and have my anxiety disappear like you can." Her words stung, but she was right. What worked for me wasn't automatically working for her. She needed professional help, not just spiritual truisms. Her therapist helped her distinguish between healthy concern and unhealthy anxiety, helped her develop coping mechanisms, helped her see that my way of processing uncertainty wasn't the only valid way. "I'm learning," she told me a few months into therapy, "that trusting God with the future doesn't mean I won't feel anxious. It means I can feel anxious and still take steps forward." That's exactly right. Trust doesn't eliminate fear, it coexists with it. You can be scared and still trust. I needed to hear that. I thought I was failing at trust because I still felt afraid. The crisis finally began to stabilize. Donors gradually returned. Media attention shifted elsewhere. The organization rebuilt credibility through consistent integrity and transparency. But we'd been changed by the experience. More humble, more aware of our limitations, more grateful for what survived. At a staff meeting, I shared vulnerability I wouldn't have before the crisis. A decade ago, I couldn't function without certainty about outcomes. This crisis has taught me something deeper. I can lead without certainty. I can make hard decisions without guaranteeing they're right. I can face an uncertain organizational future while trusting that God's already in it. One staff member asked, How do you maintain that trust when everything feels like it's falling apart? I don't maintain it perfectly. Some days I'm anxious and scared, but I've learned that God's presence in my future isn't dependent on my feelings about it. He's already there, whether I feel peaceful or panicked. My job is to keep choosing trust, even when it's hard. The small group I led became a lifeline during the crisis. These people knew my struggles, prayed for me, reminded me of truth when I forgot. David, who'd started his business years ago, shared, "Your crisis reminds me that God being in our future doesn't prevent difficulty. It means He's present in the difficulty." Sarah, now a mother of 3, said, "Watching you lead through this has taught me more than any of your talks. You're living what you teach, trusting God when you can't see how it will work out." Their support sustained me, but I also saw the impact beyond just me. The whole group was learning that trust in God's presence in the future wasn't just for good times. It was especially for crises when certainty was impossible. Lily's school had a career day. She asked me to come talk about my work. Standing in front of 30 fifth graders, I shared about leading a non-profit. One student asked, "What's the hardest part of your job?" Making decisions when I can't see how they'll turn out, leading people through uncertainty, trusting that God's in our future even when the present is really hard. How do you do that? I remember that I don't have to see the future to trust that God's already in it. That helps me make decisions despite uncertainty. Driving home with Lily, she said, "I'm proud of you, Dad." Why? Because you do your job even though it's hard, even though you can't know if everything will work out. Her words meant more than any board commendation. My daughter was seeing me live with integrity through uncertainty, and it was shaping how she approached her own uncertain futures. By the end of that year, the organization had stabilized. We'd lost 30% of our funding, but had cut costs accordingly. We'd closed one location but strengthened the others. We'd lost trust but were rebuilding it through consistent integrity. The crisis hadn't destroyed us, but it had changed us, and in many ways the changes were good. Better oversight, stronger accountability, more humility. At the 10-year anniversary event of Hearing God's Voice, I reflected on the journey, a decade of learning to trust God's presence in my future. Through career changes, marriage, parenthood, loss, and now organizational crisis. 10 years ago, I shared with the gathered group, God told me the future isn't uncertain because He's already there. I thought that would make life easier, but it didn't. It made it more faithful. I still face uncertainty, still make decisions without seeing outcomes, still walk through crises not knowing how they'll end. But I do it knowing God's already in whatever future emerges, and that changes everything. A woman in the audience asked, "Does it get easier? Trusting when you can't see?" Yes and no. It gets more familiar. You recognize the pattern, know the steps, remember that God's been faithful before. But each new situation still requires fresh trust. The crisis at work tested me in ways I hadn't been tested before. I had to relearn the same lesson in a new context. God's in my future regardless of outcomes. That night, writing in my journal, I reflected on how God had sustained me through the worst professional crisis of my life. Not by preventing it, not by guaranteeing a specific outcome, but by being present throughout. 10 years of learning to trust. The future is still uncertain to me. I still can't see tomorrow. But I've learned that my inability to see doesn't mean God isn't already there. In the crisis, in the chaos, in the uncertainty, He's already there, already working, already redeeming, already writing a story I can't see yet. And that truth, that profound, sustaining truth, is enough to walk forward despite not seeing the path clearly. I thought about all that God had sustained me through. Marriage, career changes, parenthood, my father's death, and now organizational crisis. None of it had come with certainty. All of it had required trust. But God had been faithful. Not always in ways I'd predicted or preferred, but faithful nonetheless. And I was learning that His faithfulness in my future was as certain as His presence in my present, because He was already there. 12 years after God spoke to me, Claire and I face the kind of crisis that tests everything you believe about trust. She was diagnosed with breast cancer, stage 2, requiring aggressive treatment. Sitting in the oncologist's office hearing the diagnosis, I felt every old fear trying to resurface. What if treatment failed? What if the cancer spread? What if I lost her? What if our kids lost their mother? But 12 years of learning to trust had prepared me for this moment. Not prepared me to not feel fear, prepared me to feel fear while still choosing trust. God, I prayed silently while the doctor explained treatment options. You're already in Claire's future, already in this cancer journey, already holding outcomes I can't see. Help me trust your presence more than I trust my predictions. Claire was remarkably calm processing the news. I'm scared, she told me in the parking lot. But I remember what you've taught all these years. God's already in my future. That includes this cancer. You don't have to be strong. You can be scared. I am scared, but I'm also trusting. They're not opposites, right? That's what you always say. Driving home, we had to tell Lily and Jacob. At 12, Lily was old enough to understand the seriousness. At 8, Jacob knew cancer was bad, but didn't grasp the full implications. Mom has cancer, I told them, Claire beside me. She's going to need treatment, chemotherapy, and possibly surgery. It's going to be a hard year. Lily started crying immediately. Is Mom going to die? Claire took her hand. I'm going to fight this hard. The doctors are optimistic about treatment, but we also have to trust that God's already in my future, whatever it holds. Jacob asked simpler questions. Will your hair fall out? Will you be sick? Can I still hug you? We answered honestly while offering reassurance. And that night after the kids went to bed, Claire and I both broke down. I'm terrified, she admitted. I know God's in my future, but I'm still terrified of what that future might hold. Me too. Trust doesn't eliminate fear. It just means we don't face the fear alone. How do you stay so calm? I'm not calm. I'm choosing trust despite panic. There's a difference. Inside, I'm as scared as you are, but I've learned that God being in your future is more reliable than my fears about it. Claire started treatment the following week. Chemotherapy was brutal. Nausea, exhaustion, hair loss, emotional volatility. Watching her suffer while being unable to fix it was excruciating. The old me would have tried to control every aspect of her treatment, research every option obsessively, demand certainty about outcomes before feeling any peace. The new me supported her choices, trusted her medical team, and focused on being present rather than trying to control outcomes. But it was still hard. Some days I wanted to demand God show me how this would end, wanted guarantees that she'd survive, wanted certainty that our kids wouldn't lose their mom. At work, I had to step back significantly. My leadership team stepped up, carrying responsibilities I usually handled. It was humbling, but also revealing. The organization didn't depend on my constant involvement as much as I'd thought. My COO, Michael, whom I'd mentored for years, took over day-to-day operations. How are you really doing? He asked during one of our check-ins. Hanging on. Some days are harder than others, but I'm trusting that God's in Claire's future, in our family's future. That's what gets me through. I've learned so much from watching you lead through crisis. You don't need certainty to move forward. That's powerful. I wish I'd learned it earlier. Would have saved me years of paralysis. At home, Lily struggled with anxiety about losing her mum. She started having panic attacks, couldn't sleep, became hypervigilant about Claire's symptoms. We got her into therapy immediately. Her therapist helped her distinguish between realistic concern and catastrophic thinking. I keep imagining Mom dying, Lily told us one evening. I can't stop thinking about it. I recognize the pattern, trying to predict and control the future through obsessive worry. Lily, I understand. When I was younger, I did the same thing. Tried to predict every outcome, imagine every possibility, as if knowing what might happen would protect me from it actually happening. Did it work? No. It just exhausted me. What worked was learning to trust that God's already in the future. I can't see Mum's future, but God can, and He's already there, already holding it. But what if the future is bad? What if Mum dies? then God's already in that too, already preparing us, already holding us through it. The future isn't uncertain to Him, even when it's terrifying to us. That doesn't make me less scared. It's not supposed to eliminate fear. It's supposed to give you something solid to hold on to when fear is overwhelming. You can be scared and still trust. They coexist. Her therapist reinforced similar messages, and gradually Lily's panic attacks decreased. She was learning young what had taken me decades to learn. You can face an uncertain future with trust instead of terror. Jacob processed his mum's illness differently. He became extra affectionate, wanting to be near Claire constantly. He'd make her cards, bring her water, try to help in ways an 8-year-old could. One evening I found him praying by himself. God, please make Mom better. Please don't let her die. Please be in her future like Dad says you are. His simple prayer wrecked me. He was learning to pray through uncertainty, to bring his fears to God, to trust even when he couldn't understand. Claire's treatment continued through summer and fall. Good days and bad days, progress and setbacks, hope and discouragement. The hardest part was the waiting for scans, waiting for test results, waiting to see if treatment was working. In the waiting, all my old tendencies toward demanding certainty would resurface. My therapist, Dr. Chen, helped me process. You're being triggered back to your old patterns because the stakes are so high. I thought I'd learned this lesson, but facing losing Claire, I want certainty more than ever. That's human, but you've spent 12 years building trust muscles. Use them. You know how to wait in uncertainty. You know how to trust God's presence in the future, even when you can't see that future. It's harder when it's my wife's life. Of course it is, but the principle remains the same. God's already in her future. You don't have to see it to trust it. At church, our community rallied around us. Meals, childcare, prayers, encouragement. It was tangible evidence of God's presence in our crisis. Pastor Joel visited regularly. How's your faith holding up? It's being tested. I believe God's in our future, but sometimes I'm angry that the future might include losing Claire. That's honest. And it's okay to be angry while still trusting. Lament and trust aren't opposites. I think I've believed that trust means not feeling afraid or angry. But maybe trust means feeling those things and still choosing to believe God's faithful. Yes, that's mature faith. Trust that includes honesty about struggle is stronger than trust that pretends struggle doesn't exist. His permission to struggle while trusting was liberating. I didn't have to pretend to be at peace when I was terrified. The small group I led became a place to process vulnerability. I'd always taught about trusting God with uncertain futures. But now I was living the hardest application of that teaching. I'm scared I'm going to lose my wife, I admitted to the group one evening. I trust God's in our future, but I'm terrified of what that future might hold. David said, "Thank you for being honest. You've always taught us we can trust and struggle simultaneously. Watching you live, that is powerful." Sarah added, "You could have hidden behind your teaching, pretended you had it all together. But you're showing us what trust actually looks like in crisis, messy, scared, but still choosing to believe." Their support reminded me that vulnerability wasn't weakness. It was the path to authentic community. Claire finished chemotherapy in December. The scans showed the tumor had shrunk significantly, but she'd need surgery and radiation. Sitting in the surgical waiting room while Claire was in surgery, I wrestled with God. I've trusted you for 12 years. I've learned to walk forward despite uncertainty, but this is my wife, my partner, my kid's mother. I need her to be okay. Please let her be okay. I felt the Spirit whisper, I'm already in her future. Trust me. I am trusting you, but I'm also terrified. Both can be true. Trust isn't the absence of fear. It's choosing me in the presence of fear. The surgery was successful. The surgeon got clean margins. Claire would need radiation, but the prognosis was good. Relief flooded through me. But I also recognized something. Even if the outcome had been different, God would still have been faithful. His presence in our future wasn't conditional on the outcome I preferred. Christmas that year was bittersweet. Claire was recovering but exhausted. We simplified everything, focused on being together. I'm grateful, Claire said on Christmas morning, watching the kids open presents. For each day, for this moment. I don't know how many Christmases I'll have, but I'm grateful for this one. The doctors are optimistic. You're going to have many more. Maybe. But I've learned through this that I can't count on tomorrow. All I have is today, and today is enough. Her words echoed what I'd learned years ago. We don't need to see the future to trust that God's in it. We just need to be present in today. Claire's radiation treatments continued into spring, less intense than chemo, but still difficult. The cumulative exhaustion was profound. I watched her push through with remarkable strength. "How are you doing this?" I asked one evening. "The same way you've done everything, trusting that God's in my future. I can't see if I'll be cancer-free long-term. I can only trust that God's already in whatever future I have. You've become the teacher. I've been learning from you through this. We teach each other. That's how it works." By that summer, Claire finished all treatment. She was in remission. We celebrated cautiously, cancer-free for now, with regular monitoring ahead. But the experience had changed us both, changed our priorities, our perspectives, our gratitude for each day. Lily, having watched her mum go through treatment, wrote an essay for school. "My mum had cancer. I was really scared. My dad taught me that God is already in our future, so we don't have to be controlled by fear of what might happen. My mom's okay now, but even if she wasn't, God would still be there. That helps me be less scared." Her teacher shared the essay with me. Seeing my 12-year-old articulate what I'd spent years learning brought tears. At work, I returned to full involvement. The organization had thrived during my reduced presence, which was both humbling and encouraging. Michael told me, "You've built something that doesn't depend on you being everything. That's good leadership." I had to learn to let go. Claire's illness forced me to trust others and trust God with outcomes I couldn't control. The nonprofit launched a new program helping cancer patients and their families with financial literacy, directly inspired by Claire's journey. "Medical crises create financial crises," I told the board. "We can help families navigate both." The program served hundreds of families that first year, and I got to channel our crisis into something that helped others face similar uncertainty. At my 12-year anniversary of hearing God's voice, I reflected on how the journey had deepened, from learning to trust with career decisions, to marriage, to parenthood, to organizational crisis, to my wife's cancer. Each stage had required learning to trust more deeply, and each had proven that God really was already in my future. I wrote in my journal, 12 years of learning to trust. This year tested me like never before. Facing losing Claire forced me to ask, do I really believe God's in our future, even if that future includes loss? And I discovered yes, not easily, not without struggle, but yes, God's in our future whether Claire survives long-term or the cancer returns. Whether our kids grow up with their mom or have to face losing her, God's already there. And that truth, tested in fire, has proven unshakable. I thought about Lily and Jacob learning to trust despite uncertainty while watching their mom fight cancer. About Claire embodying trust in the hardest application. About our community surrounding us through crisis. The future still held uncertainty. Claire's cancer could return, but God was already in whatever future we faced. And that profound, tested, proven truth was enough to keep walking forward. 15 years after God spoke to me, I faced a crisis that tested everything I'd learned in an entirely new way. Lily, now 15, came to us with news that shattered my sense of control. She was pregnant. She sat on the couch between Claire and me, crying so hard she could barely speak. I'm so sorry. I messed up everything." Every parental instinct wanted to demand, "How did this happen? Who's the father? What were you thinking?" But I'd learned enough by now to pause, breathe, and ask a different question. "Lily, sweetheart, we love you. Tell us what's going on." Through tears, she explained. She'd been dating a boy from school for 6 months, something we'd known. They'd made a mistake. One time, unplanned, unexpected, and now she was pregnant. Claire held her while she cried. I sat processing 1,000 thoughts, 1,000 fears, 1,000 uncertainties about the future. What would happen to Lily's future? Her college plans, her life trajectory? What about the baby's future? What about our family's future? All my old patterns tried to resurface. The need to predict every outcome, control every variable, see the path forward clearly before taking any step. But I'd spent 15 years learning that God was already in the future, including this future I never would have chosen, never could have predicted, and desperately wished wasn't happening. God, I prayed silently while Claire comforted Lily, you're already in this, already in Lily's future, the baby's future, our family's future. Help me trust you when everything feels completely out of control. After Lily went to bed, Claire and I stayed up talking. I'm terrified, she admitted. She's 15. This will change everything for her. I know. I am too. But we have to remember, God's already in her future, already in this baby's future. We don't have to see how it all works out. We just have to walk beside her through it. That's easier to say than to live. I know, but it's all we can do. Panic won't help her. Control won't help her. Being present and trusting God will. The next few weeks were consumed with decisions. Lily was clear she wanted to keep the baby. No adoption, no other options. The father, a boy named Ryan, wanted to be involved, but was as overwhelmed as Lily. We met with Ryan and his parents. Awkward, painful conversations about responsibility, support, how to handle school, finances, medical care. Ryan's parents were angry, demanding to know our plans. What are you going to do about this? How are you going to fix this situation? I wanted to respond with anger, with blame, but I'd learned that crisis brings out people's fears, and fear often presents as anger. We're going to support Lily and Ryan through this pregnancy and parenthood. We're going to help them finish school. We're going to trust that God's already in this baby's future, and we're going to do our best to create a supportive environment. That's it? That's your plan? Do you have a better one? We can't change what's happened. We can only move forward with integrity and trust. At church, we had to decide whether to tell people. Lily wanted to hide it as long as possible. Claire wanted to be open. I was somewhere in between. Pastor Joel counseled us, there's no perfect way to handle this, but hiding it will become impossible eventually, and secrecy breeds shame. What if you approach this with the same trust you teach? God's already in Lily's future, so you can walk through this openly. We decided to be honest. I shared during a service. Our 15-year-old daughter is pregnant. We're heartbroken and scared and uncertain about the future. But we're also trusting that God's already in this baby's life, in Lily's future, in our family's journey. We need your support, not your judgment. The response was mixed. Some people rallied around us with incredible compassion. Others pulled away, uncomfortable with our situation. A few were outright judgmental. One woman confronted me after church. How could you let this happen? Where was your parental oversight? We're not perfect parents. We made mistakes. But right now, we're focused on supporting Lily, not on defending our parenting. Her judgment stung, but I also recognized it as her discomfort with uncertainty. She wanted a formula for preventing this, a guaranteed method to control her own children's futures. But I'd learned there were no such guarantees. You could be responsible, vigilant, intentional, and life could still bring unexpected, uncontrolled outcomes. At work, I had to step back again. The organization was stable, but I needed mental and emotional energy for family. Michael, now my COO, was supportive. Take what time you need. We've got this. I'm supposed to be leading. You are leading by showing us that family comes first, that we trust God with outcomes we can't control. That's the most important leadership lesson you've taught us. Lily struggled through the first trimester. Morning sickness, exhaustion, emotional volatility. Watching my daughter experience pregnancy at 15 was heartbreaking. She cried one evening, "I've ruined my life. I'll never have the future I wanted." Your future is different than you planned, but it's not ruined. God's already in your future, Lily. Already working in this baby's life, already creating something from this situation. How can you be so positive? Aren't you disappointed in me? I'm disappointed this happened so young, but I'm not disappointed in you. You're handling a difficult situation with courage, and I believe God's already in your future, already turning this into something redemptive. I wish I had your faith. You do. I see it in how you're facing this. You're scared, but not giving up. That's faith. Jacob, now 11, struggled to understand. He knew his sister was pregnant, but didn't grasp the full implications. Am I going to be an uncle? Yes. Lily's going to have a baby, which makes you the baby's uncle. Cool. When? His innocent excitement was refreshing amid all the heaviness. He wasn't worried about futures or outcomes. He was just excited about being an uncle. Ryan started coming to our house regularly. Awkward at first, but gradually we built relationship. He was just a scared 16-year-old trying to figure out what being a father meant. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted to me one evening. "None of us do. First-time parenting is terrifying at any age. But you don't have to figure it all out now. Just take it one step at a time, trusting that God's already in your baby's future." Lily's dad says that a lot, about God already being in the future. Because it's true, and it changes how you approach uncertainty. You can't see how this will work out, neither can I, but God can, and He's already there. Lily and Ryan decided together to keep going to school, to parent together but not get married. They were too young. Our families would co-parent, supporting them both. It wasn't ideal, but it was realistic. And it required trusting God with a messy, uncertain future that didn't fit any neat plan. The small group I led became essential during this time. These people had walked with me through my own journey of learning to trust. They understood what I was facing. David said, "You've taught us for years that God's in our future regardless of outcomes. Now you're living it in the hardest possible way." Sarah added, "Thank you for not pretending you have it all together, for showing us what trust looks like when your daughter's pregnant at 15. One new group member, Thomas, asked, "How do you not spiral into what-if thinking? What if she can't finish school? What if this damages her future? What if the baby has problems?" I catch myself doing that constantly. The difference is I recognize it as fear trying to control the future through prediction. When I catch it, I remind myself, God's already in those futures. I don't have to predict or control them. That sounds simple, but it's not, is it? No, it's daily work, daily choosing trust over fear. Some days I do it well, some days I fail completely, but the trajectory is toward trust. Claire's cancer remained in remission, but the monitoring continued. Every scan brought anxiety. Living with that uncertainty while also facing Lily's pregnancy was exhausting. "Sometimes I feel like I can't handle any more uncertainty," Claire admitted one night. "Me too. But then I remember, God's already in all of it. In your health future, in Lily's future, in this baby's future. We don't have to handle it alone." I'm tired of trusting. I want certainty. I understand. Trust is exhausting, but it's the only option when certainty isn't available. Lily turned 16 and started showing. Going to school pregnant became harder. Stares, whispers, judgment from peers. She came home crying one day. "Everyone treats me like I'm trash, like I'm a cautionary tale." People are uncomfortable with situations they can't predict or control. Your pregnancy forces them to face that life doesn't follow neat plans. That triggers fear, and sometimes fear presents as judgment. I hate this. I know, sweetheart, I hate it for you. But you're not trash. You're not a cautionary tale. You're a young woman facing a difficult situation with remarkable courage. Dad, how do you know God's really in my future? How do you know this will be okay? I don't know it will be okay in the way you might want, but I know God's faithful. 15 years ago, He told me He was already in my future. He's proven that truth through career changes, marriage, your mum's cancer. organizational crisis. Every time he's been faithful, not always in ways I predicted, but faithful. I'm trusting that same faithfulness for your future. Her due date was set for late spring. As her pregnancy progressed, practical realities hit. Where would the baby sleep? How would Lily finish school? How would Ryan stay involved? Who would provide childcare? We made plans, but I kept them loose, because 15 years had taught me that rigid plans in uncertain situations usually break. Flexible plans with room for adaptation worked better. The nonprofit launched a program for teen parents, directly inspired by Lily's situation. Financial literacy, parenting skills, educational support, community connection. You're turning your family's crisis into help for others, Maria observed during a board meeting. That's what God does. He redeems difficulty, uses pain for purpose. I've seen it in my own life repeatedly. Why would this be different? At Lily's baby shower, organized by some incredible church women, I watched our community surround my daughter with love and support. It moved me to tears. This could have destroyed us, I told Claire. The shame, the judgment, the isolation. But instead, we're surrounded by people who've chosen to see this baby as a blessing, not a mistake. That's what happens when you choose trust over shame. When you believe God's already in the future, instead of hiding from present reality. Ryan's parents gradually softened. His mother reached out to Claire. I was so angry at first. Angry at Ryan, angry at Lily, angry at the situation. But watching all of you trust God through this, it's challenged me. I've been trying to control my kids' futures their whole lives. This situation is teaching me I can't. These moments of redemption in the midst of crisis reminded me God really was already in this future, working in ways I couldn't have orchestrated or predicted. Lily graduated high school 2 weeks before her due date. Walking across that stage, visibly pregnant, receiving her diploma, it was one of the proudest moments of my life. I didn't think I'd finish, she admitted afterward, but you did, because God was in your future all along, even when you couldn't see how. 3 days later, Lily went into labor. 26 hours of labor, complications, emergency C-section. I spent those hours in the waiting room praying, trusting, fighting every instinct to demand God tell me how it would end. God, you're already in this, already with Lily, already with this baby. I trust you. Our grandson Noah was born at 3:47 a.m., 7 pounds, healthy, beautiful. When I held him for the first time, I felt overwhelming love mixed with overwhelming uncertainty. This child's future was unknown. His parents were teenagers. The path ahead was unclear. But God was already in Noah's future, just like he'd been in mine, in Lily's, in our whole families. Welcome to the world, Noah, I whispered to him. You're already so loved, and God's already in your future, already holding it, already working in it. Lily recovered from the C-section. Ryan was attentive. Our families figured out co-parenting logistics. It was messy and imperfect and exhausting, but it was also beautiful. Watching Lily mother Noah, watching Ryan step into fatherhood, watching our family adapt. God was redeeming what could have been shameful into something grace-filled. At my 15-year anniversary of hearing God's voice, I reflected on how the journey had deepened yet again. From career uncertainty to marriage, to parenthood, to crisis, to my daughter's teenage pregnancy. I wrote in my journal, 15 years of learning to trust. This year tested me in ways I never imagined. Becoming a grandfather at 42 to a grandson born to my teenage daughter, not a future I would have chosen or predicted, but God was already here. Already in this situation before it happened. Already working redemption I couldn't see coming. The future still holds uncertainty, for Lily, for Noah, for all of us. But God's already there, and that truth, proven over 15 years, tested in every kind of crisis, has become unshakable. I still can't see the future, but I know the one who's already in it, and that's enough. Noah's first few months were chaos. Lily and Ryan parenting while living with us and trying to figure out their next steps. Sleep deprivation, stress, adjustments, but also joy. Watching Noah smile, grow, develop. watching Lily discover strength she didn't know she had, watching our family expand in unexpected ways. God's already in Noah's future became our family's repeated truth. When we were worried, exhausted, uncertain, we'd remind each other, God's already there. And that truth, the tested, proven, life-transforming truth, continued to sustain us through every uncertain tomorrow. 20 years after God spoke to me in that church parking lot, I found myself back in the same spot. The building had changed, the parking lot had been repaved, but this was where my journey began, where God shattered my need for certainty and taught me to trust His presence in the future. I was back in Seattle for a conference, and I'd driven to this sacred space to reflect on 2 decades of learning to trust. 20 years ago, I'd sat here paralyzed by fear of an uncertain future. Couldn't propose to Claire because I couldn't predict how marriage would work out. Couldn't change jobs because I couldn't guarantee success. Couldn't make any decision without certainty about outcomes. And God had spoken words that changed everything. Your future is not uncertain. I'm already there. 2 decades later, I was living proof of that promise. Claire sat beside me, now 47 and 5 years cancer-free. We'd been married for 18 years, years I almost missed because I was too afraid of the future to commit. Lily, now 20, was thriving. She'd finished community college while raising Noah, now 4 years old. She and Ryan had eventually gotten married, not because they had to, but because they'd grown together through parenting and wanted to build a life together. Jacob was 16, discovering his own path, learning to navigate uncertainty with the tools Claire and I had taught him. The nonprofit I led had expanded to 15 cities, helping over 100,000 families achieve financial stability. We'd weathered scandals, funding crises, leadership transitions, all of it requiring trust that God was already in our organizational future. None of it had been predictable. All of it required trust. "Can you believe it's been 20 years?" Claire asked, looking at the church. "I can't. That night I thought I was just having a breakdown. I didn't know God was giving me a truth that would transform my entire life. It transformed mine, too. Watching you learn to trust taught me to do the same. Especially during cancer." We sat in comfortable silence, both reflecting on the journey. That evening I spoke at a conference of 5,000 people, church leaders, non-profit directors, business executives, all gathered to learn about leading through uncertainty. Standing on that stage, I shared my story one more time, but this time with 20 years of evidence that God's promise was trustworthy. 20 years ago, I was paralyzed by fear of an uncertain future. I couldn't make decisions without guaranteeing outcomes. I exhausted myself trying to predict and control everything. And I was miserable. I shared about that night in the parking lot, about God's words, about learning to trust His presence in my future more than my ability to predict it. Over these 20 years, I've faced everything I feared. Career changes without certainty, marriage without knowing how it would work out, parenthood without guaranteeing I'd be good at it, my wife's cancer without knowing if she'd survive, organizational crisis without knowing if we'd recover, my teenage daughter's pregnancy without knowing how it would affect her future. I paused, letting the weight of those crises settle. Every one of those situations offered me a choice. Try to control the outcome through prediction and micromanagement, or trust that God was already in that future. And every single time I chose trust over control, I experienced His faithfulness. I shared about Noah, now 4 years old, a grandson I never would have predicted but couldn't imagine life without. Noah exists because my daughter made a mistake that terrified me, that challenged everything I thought I knew about Lily's future. But God was already in that future, already working redemption I couldn't see. Noah isn't a mistake. He's evidence that God's already in our futures, turning what we fear into what we need. After the talk, the line of people wanting to share their stories stretched for hours. I stayed until I'd talked with everyone, because I remembered being where many of them were, desperate for hope that trusting God with an uncertain future was actually possible. One young woman, probably late 20s, told me through tears, "I've been engaged for 2 years but can't set a wedding date because I'm terrified it won't work out. Your story gives me hope. I can move forward, despite fear." An executive shared, "I've turned down 3 job offers because I can't guarantee which one is right. I've been stuck for a year. Hearing you say God's already in all those futures, that helps." A pastor said, "My church is facing a major decision about relocation. I've been paralyzed trying to predict which choice is right, but you're right, God's already in both futures. We don't have to predict perfectly, we just have to trust faithfully." These conversations reminded me that 20 years later, the message was still desperately needed. People everywhere were stuck, afraid, paralyzed by uncertainty, just like I'd been. The next day, I visited the coffee shop where I'd proposed to Claire 18 years ago. She met me there, and we celebrated our anniversary over coffee. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't learned to trust?" she asked. "All the time. I almost missed you because I was too afraid to commit. I would have stayed in a job that wasn't fulfilling because change felt too uncertain. I might have avoided writing, speaking, all the ways God's used my story. Fear of the future would have kept me from actually living. What's different now? Do you not feel uncertainty anymore?" "I feel it all the time. The future still feels uncertain to me. I can't see tomorrow any better than I could 20 years ago. But I've learned that my inability to see the future doesn't mean it's uncertain. God can see it, and He's already there. That's what's changed. Not my ability to predict, but my willingness to trust." We talked about the future, our kids' futures, our grandson's future. So much was unknown, but we weren't afraid of that unknown anymore. Later that week, I had lunch with Marcus, the friend whose startup I'd joined 20 years ago, which had eventually been acquired. We'd remained close through all the years and transitions. "Remember when you couldn't decide whether to join my company?" He laughed. "You agonized for months. I was so afraid of making the wrong choice, so convinced I needed certainty before committing. And now? Now I know there wasn't a wrong choice. God was already in both futures, the one where I joined you and the one where I didn't. The question wasn't which choice guarantees the best outcome. It was which choice aligns with my values and calling, trusting God's already there. That perspective has transformed how I make decisions too. Watching you learn to trust has taught me to do the same. Back home in San Francisco, I spent time with Noah. At 4, he was full of questions about everything, including the future. "Grandpa, what will I be when I grow up?" "I don't know, buddy. But God already knows, and He's already in your future making it beautiful." "Is God everywhere?" "Yes, even in all your tomorrows that haven't happened yet." His simple acceptance of that truth reminded me of what Jesus said about childlike faith. Noah wasn't worried about uncertainty. He just trusted that God was in his future. Lily and Ryan brought Noah over for dinner regularly. Watching them parent, young but growing, imperfect but committed, filled me with gratitude. "I never thought I'd have a kid at 16, Lily told me one evening. "I was so scared my life was over, but you kept telling me God was already in my future." "Were you able to believe it?" "Eventually. Not at first. I was too scared. But over time, as I saw God provide, saw how He worked things out in ways I couldn't have planned, I started trusting. Now I tell Noah the same thing you told me. God's already in his future. That's how truth gets passed down. I learned it, lived it, and now you're teaching Noah." Ryan joined the conversation. "I was terrified of being a dad at 16, but you both helped me see that God was already in Noah's future, that I didn't have to have everything figured out to be a good father. I just had to show up and trust. And you've done that beautifully. Both of you have." Jacob, now 16 himself, was navigating the same age where Lily had gotten pregnant. He was anxious about making mistakes, about his uncertain future. "Dad, how do you know which choices are right? There are so many options for college, careers, everything. What if I choose wrong?" I heard my own 27-year-old self in his questions. "Jacob, most choices don't have a right and wrong. They have multiple good options, and God's already in all of them. The question isn't which choice guarantees the best outcome. It's which choice aligns with who I am and who God's made me to be, trusting He's already in whatever future emerges. But what if I mess up like Lily did? Then God would be in that future too. Lily's mistake gave us Noah. God redeemed what she feared into something beautiful. Not saying mistakes don't have consequences, they do. But God's already in those futures too, working redemption. How do you trust like that? Practice. Every day I face uncertainties. Every day I have to choose. Will I demand certainty before moving forward, or will I trust that God's already in my future? Most days I choose trust. Some days I still choose fear, but the trajectory is clear. The non-profit celebrated its 25th anniversary that year. We'd helped over 250,000 families, expanded to 20 cities, trained thousands of financial counselors. At the celebration, I reflected on how it all started. Me joining a struggling startup, taking a pay cut, trusting that God was in that uncertain career move. Everything we've accomplished, I told the gathered staff and supporters, happened because people learned to trust that God was already in their financial futures. We didn't promise certainty, we taught trust. We didn't guarantee outcomes. We pointed to a God who's already in every tomorrow. One woman we'd helped years ago shared, "I came here bankrupt and hopeless. You taught me to budget, but more importantly, you taught me to trust that God was already in my financial future." That changed everything. Today, I'm debt-free, I have savings, and I'm teaching others what I learned. These testimonies reminded me that the truth God had taught me wasn't just personal, it was transformative for everyone who embraced it. I wrote a second book that year, titled 20 Years of Learning to Trust, How God's Presence in the Future Changes Everything. It expanded on my first book, adding 2 decades of evidence that God's promise was trustworthy. One chapter was titled, When the Future You Feared Becomes the Life You're Grateful For. In it, I wrote about almost not marrying Claire, almost not taking career risks, almost missing everything beautiful because I demanded certainty. The future I feared, marriage, career changes, parenthood, crisis, became the life I'm grateful for, not because everything was easy, but because God was faithful. He really was already in every future I stepped into, and trusting that presence transformed how I lived. The book resonated globally, translations in 30 languages, over 1 million copies sold. The message was universal. People everywhere were paralyzed by fear of uncertain futures. One reviewer wrote, "This isn't just a book about trust. It's a roadmap for living fully despite uncertainty. In a world that demands guarantees, Moore shows us how to walk forward when guarantees don't exist." At church, I was asked to teach a series on trusting God with the future. Standing before our congregation, I shared vulnerably about the entire 20-year journey. I'm not standing here because I've mastered trust. I'm standing here because I've practiced trust for 20 years and discovered it's trustworthy. God really is already in our futures. I've tested that truth through every kind of uncertainty, and it's proven faithful every single time. After the series, Pastor Joel told me, "You've given this church something invaluable, permission to face the future without demanding certainty. That's pastoral care at its finest." Claire's 5-year cancer-free anniversary came that fall. We celebrated quietly, gratefully, aware that the future still held uncertainty about her health. "Are you worried it will come back?" I asked her. "Sometimes, but I've learned from you, God's already in my health future. Whether I stay cancer-free or it returns, He's already there. I don't have to see that future to trust Him in it. I've learned from you too. Watching you face cancer with trust taught me depths of faith I'd never seen before. We teach each other. That's what 20 years of marriage gives you, mutual shaping toward trust." At my 20-year anniversary of hearing God's voice, I spent a day alone in prayer and reflection. 20 years of learning one truth in 1,000 different applications. God is already in my future. I wrote in my journal, 20 years since God spoke. 20 years of learning to trust His presence in my future more than my ability to predict it. 20 years of evidence that his promise is trustworthy. I faced every fear I had 20 years ago, committed to marriage, changed careers multiple times, raised children, faced cancer, navigated organizational crisis, became a grandfather through my teenage daughter's pregnancy. Every single situation offered the same choice: demand certainty or trust God's presence. Every time I chose trust, I discovered He was already there, already working, already redeeming, already faithful. The future still feels uncertain to me. I still can't see tomorrow any better than I could 20 years ago, but I've learned that my inability to see doesn't mean the future is uncertain. It just means I'm not God. He can see every tomorrow. He's already in every future I'll face, and trusting that truth has given me more freedom, peace, and abundant life than any amount of certainty ever could. I thought about Noah, growing up learning young what took me decades to discover. About Lily and Ryan, building a life on trust rather than certainty. About Jacob, watching all of us model what it means to face uncertain futures with faith. About Claire, my partner in learning to trust for 20 years. I thought about the hundreds of thousands of people who'd found freedom through the non-profits programs, the millions who'd read my books, the thousands I'd spoken to directly. All of it happened because God spoke one sentence 20 years ago. Your future is not uncertain. I'm already there. That evening, our whole family gathered. Claire and me, Lily and Ryan and Noah, Jacob. We shared a meal and reflected on how God had been faithful. 20 years ago, I told them, I couldn't commit to your mum because I was terrified of an uncertain future. If you'd told me then that 2 decades later I'd be sitting here with all of you, I wouldn't have believed it. Not because it sounds bad, but because it's so much better than anything I could have controlled my way into. Lily said, you taught me that God's in my future even when I'm terrified. That's what got me through having Noah at 16. Jacob added, you're teaching me I don't have to see my whole future to take the next step, that God's already there. Claire squeezed my hand. And you taught me that trust doesn't mean we won't face hard things. It means God's with us through them. Noah, not quite understanding but sensing the moment's importance, said, God's already in tomorrow, right, Grandpa? That's right, buddy. God's already in all your tomorrows. As I looked around the table at this family, I almost missed. Because I demanded certainty, I felt overwhelming gratitude. Not that everything had been easy. It hadn't. Not that I'd seen clearly how it would all work out. I hadn't. But God had been faithful. Every step, every decision, every crisis, every uncertainty, He'd been already there. 20 years after God spoke, I was finally living like I truly believed it. Not perfectly, not without moments of doubt and fear, but progressively, consistently, transformatively. The future still held uncertainty. Claire's health could change. Our kids would face their own challenges. The non-profit might face new crises. Life would continue bringing surprises, difficulties, unknowns. But God was already in all of it, already in every tomorrow I'd face, already working, already present, already faithful. And that truth, that simple, profound, life-transforming truth, was enough, more than enough. It was everything. I closed my journal that night with words that captured the entire 20-year journey. Your future is not uncertain. I am already there. God spoke those words once. I've been learning to live them for 20 years, and I'll spend the rest of my life continuing to discover how true they are. Not because I can see the future, but because I know the one who's already in it. And knowing Him is better than seeing tomorrow could ever be. The journey wasn't over. New futures would require new trust. But I'd learned the pattern, discovered the truth, tested the promise. God was already there, in every tomorrow, in every uncertainty, in every feared future, and that made all the difference.